So I'm Connor, I'm an environment artist. I've been working in the industry for a little over 2 years now. I've been at Ubisoft for the majority of those years. I've worked on 3 titles so far, one of those being Fract at my previous company, Endreams, which is a VR company. And then the other 2 were 2 unannounced titles since then. And I like to eat pizza, but who doesn't? So, Chris?
Hey, I'm Chris, I'm a character artist. Me and Connor joined University of South Wales probably about 6 years ago in 2016 now. So we've been through the ropes with Pierre, Simon and Gina. We've sort of like gone through the journey that if you're not in University of South Wales right now and you want to, we've sort of been through that journey ahead of time. And if you are at your study right now, we've been in your guys' position.
Yep.
Also, yeah, I've been at Rebellion for 3 years. It was my first AAA job. I did 2 indie studios. I call them indie studios on my CV. In reality, I did Transfuser twice, which is like this sort of government-funded indie make a game in your classroom style competition. And then from there, joined Rebellion, been here for 3 years. I started on the pre-production of Sniper Elite 5, which came out in May 24th, little plug there. And then I've been on post-production DLC and sort of leading that for about 6 months. And then now I'm working on a couple of unannounced projects. And yeah, I had a lot of fun doing it. So hopefully we can go into not too in-depth, like Connor said. We're not going to go through how we use software, what technical stuff we do, but it's more so just if people don't know if they want to do game art, we want to sort of like show you a little bit about it, I guess, and see if it's an interest for you.
Yeah. Hopefully it has a bit of everything for everybody. So if you haven't joined a course yet at uni, then hopefully it will give you a bit of an insight into what you'll actually be doing. But then if you are in a course, hopefully we stumble on a few things that will help you out with your projects.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll get into it. So these are the topics that we'll be addressing today. So we're just going to start off with just giving you basically a rough understanding of what the jobs and roles are within the industry. Then we'll be covering a little bit about environment art, specifically level art, and then we'll be jumping into character art, studio differences and how indie studios and AAA studios differ, and then evolution in game art, art foundation, and then at the end we'll do a sort of brief Q&A. So we've got 2 parts of the presentation, so if you have any art related questions, it's important to note those down, ask that at the end of this presentation, and if you have any questions on getting into the industry, we'll leave that to the next presentation. So yeah, so let's get stuck in. So job roles.
Yeah, so there's a lot of jobs in the game industry. A lot of people think it's either you make environments or you make characters, and that's like the area we are covering today, but if you like, I don't know, if you were that weird kid who liked fire and like you had like, I don't know, lighters as a kid, you can be a VFX artist. We actually pay you to do that, just to make fire in video games. It's pretty cool. So don't think of like a one-dimensional view of the game industry being like what you see in the big screens and on the posters on the front covers of games, like rocks and faces. There's so much here that we aren't even able to go through today. So if you have any questions actually about these job roles, please ask us at the end of this presentation. We can hopefully bounce off you guys and give you guys a little bit of insight. We have a lot of friends who are just concept artists or tech artists or vehicle artists. So we know a little bit secondhand about those jobs. I'm a little bit enough hoping to give you guys like a little bit of direction with that if you want to pursue that.
And there's no stupid questions. So any questions you guys have, we're happy to hear them. This is what we're here for, so just use us, sort of thing.
The only stupid questions about stuff we can't talk about. I'm sure you guys can expect that. Don't ask us about NDAs.
Yeah, so we'll jump in to environment art. So what is environment art? So we are world builders. Basically, we're the construction workers of the games industry at the end of the day. So yeah, we're responsible for making the scenery that surrounds the player. So what are the subdisciplines within environment art? So the 5 major disciplines in environment art are prop art, level art, materials, tech art, and lighting. So prop art is basically what it is on the tin. You'll be making props that will go into the environments, and then level art is what the artists will be using those props to go into to build the environments with. Materials are basically, so you could be making like textures for things like garments that will go on obviously characters, or you could be working on stuff like stone or mud materials that will be used by the level artists to paint their terrain with and create their stuff with. Then we've got tech art. Tech art, they're kind of like a sweet mix between programmer and artist. They're mainly responsible for creating things like shaders, and obviously our materials, all of our materials use shaders. That's how they render properly. And then they're mainly responsible for creating things like tools that will generally just speed up the production process for the level artists and the prop artists. So they're highly essential role within the industry. And then finally, we've got lighting. So another really important role within the industry. Depending on what company you go to, you'll have dedicated lighting artists, but you'll also be doing lighting artists, especially for your university projects. But yeah, they're responsible for obviously lighting the scene, making sure the players actually can see where they're going, and then reinforcing points of interest. And again, just improving the composition and bringing things to life. So, like I said, we only have time to talk about level art today, but obviously if you have any questions about any of this other stuff, feel free to ask it in the Q&A at the end. So what is level art? So yeah, throughout the course of working for Ubisoft so far, I've mainly been doing level art. It's probably the role that I enjoy the most. Level art is the closest you'll get to world building at the end of the day. So if you enjoy doing that stuff rather than working on the props, then this is probably the role for you. It can be a multidiscipline role. So like I said at the start, you could be either doing all those sub-disciplines or you could just be doing specialist stuff like just the level art. It's extremely collaborative role, probably more than you'd think. You'll be working a lot with level designers to create the balance between that fun, exciting gameplay as well as aesthetics. Another few examples of teams that you'll probably be working with are narrative, and this is obviously for stuff like main mission areas and just ensuring the environments progress alongside the story and they represent that. And then a few other teams you'll be working with are sound, VFX, and lighting, although those are usually towards the end of a production cycle on an environment. And then the only other one is cinematics. So this is things like, again, main mission areas, and then, for example, making sure performance captures fit in within the environment nicely, and the cinematics deliver an impactful experience. It's a good opportunity to get your own stories into the game, which we'll talk about later. And yeah, it can be quite rewarding. It's your opportunity to make your mark on the game world. So what softwares will we be using? So the main software that you'll probably be using is obviously the game engine. For those that aren't familiar with what a game engine is basically what we use to just compile everything into. It's what the game is built in. At Ubisoft, we use Snowdrop or Anvil. Those are our main proprietary engines. But for you guys, you'll just want to stick to Unreal Engine. You can use Unity as well, but Unity is generally more programmer-orientated, so it's safe to just stick with Unreal Engine. It's the closest to industry standards, and it's as artist-friendly as you'll get. Modeling tools, so you could be either using 3ds Max, Maya, or Blender. At Ubisoft, we use 3ds Max. And then texturing, you'll be using either Photoshop or Substance Painter. It's important to note that even though you might not be doing much modeling or prop art in environment art, especially if you're going to a bigger sort of studio, you'll still need to have these skills. They're really essential, because not only will you be requesting assets, but sometimes you'll be making the blockouts of those assets. So it's important to know that have a general sort of knowledge of these skills, so then when you're making your requests and making the blockouts, you can then convey what you actually want from your prop, so you're ensured a prop that you actually wanted to get in the end. So yeah, so we'll jump into stages of production. So this can apply to pretty much everything in game art. But yeah, obviously everything starts with pre-production. So mainly in this stage, we'll be mainly focusing on idea generation and reference gathering. Those are the two major things. Yeah, you'll be speaking a lot with level designers and the other teams that I mentioned before to figure out what we actually want the gameplay spaces to be and how we want them to play out. It's probably one of the most boring roles. Everybody knows it, and I didn't do a lot of it at university because it was so boring, but it is one of the major steps in ensuring that environment ends up looking as, correct to the vision. So it's a really important step. You should never skip it. An important piece of software that we use for this is PureF. If you don't know what it is, it's basically a program that you can use to sort of copy and paste all of your images into and make a sort of large collage of reference, and you can overlay it on top of a screen. So say if you have like a 3D modeling package open, you can sort of overlay it on the screen, so you can, you don't have to constantly be looking between monitors to see what your ref is. So yeah, very useful. Then next, it gets passed on to blockout, or what we like to call L1. And in this stage, you're basically, again, collaborating with level designers, but also your other level artists to basically plan out the environment and start blocking it out. You'll be collaborating with level artists as well, just in case you've got environments that sort of mesh together and connect together. So you'll be collaborating with those as well. Yeah, this is another time, an opportunity where you'll be making your asset requests, which is why the reference is important. Because once you start planning out what you want for a scene, obviously you need to have the ref to back it up, and that gets put into a whole sort of like document, which you'll send off. It's, again, probably one of the most major parts of environment art creation. You definitely don't want to skip it. It's, again, another one that I skipped in uni. I will admit my sins, but no, you don't want to skip this stage. It's extremely useful for iterating quickly and making sure your composition is correct, because that's probably one of the most important things at the end of the day when it comes to your beauty shots. So you never want to skip this stage. It's really important. This is actually a block out that I did for a piece that got me into university. Not university, Ubisoft, that's the one. So this is the piece that got me into Ubisoft. As you can see, I'm just using basic shapes. There should be no need for doing any sort of like specific modeling. You only really want to use the shapes that are in the engine by default. That's all you need. You don't need to go crazy with it. If you're making complex models, it's only going to convolute what you're doing. And yeah, it's just quicker to stick with basic shapes. So yep, don't skip it. Super useful. Then it gets passed to the L2 and L3 stages. So these are just the major development stages where you're basically building on from that block out and filling everything in with beautiful assets. So firstly, you start off with L2, and this is sort of the main stage after block out, where you'll be basically getting the major polished assets. Usually the big things we start with. And yeah, it's mainly focused on nailing down that footprint between gameplay and art, and figuring out that balance between the art and the gameplay. And then it gets passed on to L3 after that. If the art directors approve of what you've done, they'll give you a sign-off. Then you get into your L3 stage, which is where you get the opportunity for the little stories and micro details, stuff like that. And yeah, we finalize the lighting. This stage should take you up to 70% of the time that you should be working on an environment. It's obviously the most important stage, and you should definitely not leave it till last minute, because yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into making assets, which if you haven't applied to uni yet, you will sooner or later find out. So just a brief explanation on composition. This is, again, a super useful thing that you should be studying in university or on your own projects. Basically gives you the biggest bang for your buck when you're creating portfolio shots to be viewed by an employer. So what is composition? So the definition of composition is the way in which the parts of something are arranged. In game art, we extend this slightly to the way in which parts of something are arranged to create something aesthetically pleasing. So the first guide that you'll want to use is rule of thirds. If you go and look at all your films like Game of Thrones or whatever, you'll see this everywhere, honestly. So our eyes are naturally drawn to these 4 dots. It's basically just a great way to frame your main focus in your scene. And you can do that by use of the horizontal and vertical lines. Yeah, just a great one. Easy guide to use at the start, especially in block out, to try and nail down where you want your main focus to be. Then we've got the golden circle. So the golden circle is a useful tool for sort of helping us visualize where our eyes naturally lead throughout an image. We use it in Ubisoft in telling or subconsciously telling players where we want them to go. Humans are stupid; they don't know where they want to go. So we use this often to sort of when we're planning out our environment to think about how we frame our assets and how we use our assets in a way to point the player directly to where we want them to go. And the final one is the squint test. So if you blur your image, if your main focus doesn't really stand out, if it blurs into the background way too easily, then that's a sign of bad composition. Obviously, our main focus is supposed to stand out. That's how it gives us that nice impact. So squint test is another really useful one. It's super easy. Important note with all these guides though is that you don't want to be using them at the end of like when you've finished all your assets and you've got everything in the scene. You should be using this from the start. You can't just rely on these guides to just do the work for you because it's just not going to work. So yeah, just important to note that use these at the start. It'll really help you out. So a good video to watch is from tomorrow's filmmakers, 8 Steps to Cinematic Composition. Sorry. It's very character focused and on cinematography, but a lot of the theory still applies, and we can basically just provide in our environment context by switching out the character for what we want our main focus to be. So I definitely recommend watching this video if you haven't already. It's a great fundamentals sort of video to watch. And then we'll get into lighting. So lighting, another important one. This again can apply to anything in game art. It doesn't have to be just environments. It can be characters, prop art, the whole shebang. Lighting can really make or break whatever you're trying to do. So definitely don't recommend leaving this to the end, which I feel like a lot of people do, just because it's like, it's one of those ones where it takes a lot of time and mental energy to think about where you want your lights to be and how you want your lighting to be. It's also sometimes can be super technical, so it's often why it's left to the end. But yeah, as I said, lighting is normally done by a dedicated team. However, great lighting somewhat relies on the environment and the composition to be accommodating. So what I mean by that is that you can't just create an environment, do the lighting at the end and expect it all to be fancy. The environment sometimes does often have to be accommodating for good lighting, so you have to be thinking about where you want your lights to be and how you want to light your scene from the start. And obviously, you just don't want to make your lighting artist's job a living hell. Just make sure you start this from the start. Some good questions to ask yourselves when you're doing your lighting is what type of story are you trying to tell the player subconsciously? So a few questions that I've noted down for you guys to ask yourself is the environment aggressive or is it peaceful? Should the environment be leading me somewhere? Is the setting cold or warm? Is there something mysterious or obvious going on? All really good questions to ask yourself, and it will help you figure out what type of lights you need, what you want your sort of ambience to sort of look like. And yeah, great one to keep an eye on. So for the Red Dead example, you can see that they're using the bright sort of warm orange lights to sort of represent a nice cozy feel to the villages and the cities, which is obviously that contrast that they want to start portray between the dark wilderness and the cities. And then for the image here of the division, they're using that like really sort of like bright red glow to indicate that something bad is going to happen, or you may have like a boss fight in this area. And obviously it's complemented by the large skull and the freaky sign. So yeah, you can't have one without the other. You want to make sure the environment represents the lighting and vice versa. Again, contrast is key. It prevents your image from looking flat and washed out, sorry. But you can easily get carried away. So in your own projects, you want to be very careful. By default, it will probably look something like this, which is, it's not bad, but it's still not the best. Doesn't really deliver that sort of like juicy shot that you want going into your CV. So yeah, keep an eye on this and make sure to constantly be thinking about what the contrast is and fiddling around with those settings within Unreal. And obviously keep an eye on saturation. Saturation is another thing you can get carried away with easily. But again, a few videos to watch. 51 Daedalus Lighting Academy, a great one. It's slightly more irrelevant because it was all done in UE4. This was ages ago. This was during, I think, our time in university. So it might be more relevant now just because of UE5, but the theory still applies, and he goes step by step on how you can set up lighting for different situations, and he guides you through the settings as well. So it's a really good one to watch. 8 Steps to Cinematic Lighting, another one by tomorrow's filmmakers. Again, character focus, but we can still apply theory. And then Live with Maria Yu. This is a great podcast by a dedicated lighting artist where she basically just goes through step by step, like 51 Daedalus, on how she sort of thinks about her lighting, but she provides it in an environment artist context. So it's a good mix of the two. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about any of this stuff or any of the other sub-disciplines, like I said, please take a mental note of what you want to ask and feel free to ask at the Q&A. And with that, we'll pass you over to Chris.
Cool.
Do you want the clicker?
Cool. Yeah, a really cool important thing if you guys don't actually even care about environment art in any way, shape, and form, you don't care about making buildings, that all still matters, no matter what stage you're at. Like understanding the foundations of art, composition, depth, contrast, saturation, all of that matters. It doesn't change if you're even doing, like, if you just want to specialize in concept art of characters, I guarantee if you go into the industry, your art director will be annoyed and ask you to do environment at some point. So understanding like shape language, all the things that Connor just went through really matter. That doesn't mean you have to study it as much as Connor does and his team does at Ubisoft, where you're really aware of it at every point during the process of when you're making something. But at least spend a little bit of time while either in your college or university right now and getting like that foundation of the basics in really matter. And we'll talk about this probably a little bit later going into it, but art foundation does matter. So wherever you guys are at, yeah, just have a think about that in your positions right now. So I press right, and that's sick.
There we go.
Awesome. So here's some stuff that I made. This is personal work in the middle, and then stuff that I did with Rebellion on the left and the right. So this is an example of like some characters. I'm not going to go, once again, in depth in anything. I'm going to make an assumption right now to you guys, is that you're here because you want to be in the game art industry, or you're at least interested in it, is what I'm assuming, right? So I'm assuming you guys might have done some 3D before. If anyone shakes their head, I'm going to not point you out. I'm just like judging the crowd here. So if no one, I don't know if someone hasn't done 3D here, but just for them, I'll quickly make it clear. These are made of something called polygons. Polygons are like a flat square. We then make lots of them. We wrap them around something that makes a shape, like a character. And then what we do with that is we then texture it. We make lots of them. Then they look really smooth, and they make like a really cool fabric crease. And that's how you get a character in a game, by doing some technical stuff. So if you didn't know anything about 3D, that's a really quick heads up, because I might say some techie stuff, and I don't want you guys to be like scratching your head a little bit and being like, I don't know.
I probably should have mentioned that during my section, but yeah, cheers, Chris.
Character stuff. I'm going to be talking a little bit about ZBrush and sculpting. What is ZBrush? What is sculpting? You guys might have heard of Blender. Blender's like a 3D package. Blender basically does actually what ZBrush does, which is sculpting. Sculpting in a digital 3D term is like digital clay. I don't know if you guys ever played with Play-Doh, and you pull stuff and you stick it together. We do that in a really technical way, and some real cool stuff and buttons we press, and then you get a character. That's my job in a nutshell, with like 3 years of a degree behind it. It makes me feel a little small. But if anyone has any questions about ZBrush or Blender or just any sculpting stuff, please write it down, and I'll try. Hopefully that is a good explanation for it. Digital clay is what it is, but once again, write questions down for the Q&A and we'll happily go through it. Cool, so character art. This slide here is for people who are in university, but also for you guys that have an awareness then about jumping over university, what the job will actually be. So as much as I showed you pretty images before of characters, that's not entirely all of your job. You're not just there, the person who presses buttons to then make the characters. You have to do something called, and some people in this room might hate this, teamwork. Yeah, you have to work with other people. You have to. That's what the game industry is all about. It's collaboration and communication is key, and then your artistic role then assists that to make a game. That is gaming in the industry. So with this, talking about character then specifically, we are the bridge between 2D and then 3D movement. We are the person that interprets the 2D art design, we put it into the 3D world space, and then it gets given off to animators at the end of the day who make it move and walk around the game. That's our job, and that's our position in basically the pipeline of making a character in making a game. So on the left here is like a really quick version of a concept art. In an actual industry sense, you'll have something called an art director. They're the big, scary person who points fingers and says, I have a vision in my mind, I want you to make it. And then he goes to a concept artist, or they go to a concept artist, or she goes to a concept artist, and they say, please can you make, for example, this cool looking drawing with all these specific things. The concept artist then gets the funnest job in the world. They get to draw and not worry about the technical aspects. That's where I come into play. They will then give that to me after it's been approved by the art director and say, hey, can you make this for me? And I'll be like, yeah, I don't know how this is going to move, because I've got to be that translator and that person who can think about how the animators can actually make it move. Because sadly, as cool as games are, and in God of War you have the biggest dragons that are the size of mountains, in reality there's still limits in games, because we have like technical issues, I guess is the right way to word it. We're not that far ahead yet. Like we can't do everything, you know what I mean? And that's a part of where we come into play to tell the concept artist, hey, I like this like 6-armed demigorgon monster, but actually we haven't got the technical budget. And if I was to make that, my tech artist might kill me. Not literally, but they'll get very angry at me. So I go back to the concept artist and say, hey, can you change this 6-armed monster to maybe a 4-armed monster? And we can cut it, get a good deal, good compromise. And from there, we then get an approved concept. Now, here's the middle image. I don't know how to use the laser. Which one's the button?
It's the button in the middle.
Oh, that's it.
The clicker.
See that middle image? There you go. Awesome. So that's a sculpt in ZBrush. That's the thing I referred to earlier, that digital clay software. You don't need to do this in ZBrush. It's what I preferred. Pierre trained me in ZBrush. I love ZBrush. I love Pierre. It's what made me fall in love with characters. But you can do this in Blender. And Blender's a free software. So if you guys get bored after today and you're like, I want to make some digital clay Play-Doh potato face thing, because that's what my first thing was, then give it a go. There's tons of YouTube tutorials out there right now, and there's nothing stopping you. It's free.
Yeah.
From here, though, I basically get my digital clay, I drag it out, and I basically line up the shapes. I go through everything Connor just mentioned with the pure ref, the reference, the little tidbits to make sure I have a visual library not in my head, on the screen so I can see it. We all have ideas in our head, but you gotta have reference in front of you. And then I do a block out, so I will, instead of starting with each ball, you could say here, like each little piece of digital clay, I drag out the legs, I get the proportion, I line it up, then I move it, and then I iterate. And it's the same one as the L1, L2, L3. I don't call it that, I'm really unprofessional in that sense, I just do it and I write it down to remind me to do it, I guess. And then that's our digital character done, with a lot of stuff in between, but that's like the overview of it. There's always gonna be milton crines in any job you do. The third image then is like the textured version. Once again, I can't go in depth into texture on it, but basically what happens is I then line up, I look at the concept art, I hope that my little sculpt in the middle, that image gets approved by the art director because it's their vision of the game. And once it gets approved, I then texture it and I light it in a scenario. It could be not lit in a scenario if it's not for a cinematic. I might just have to trust the lighting artist to take it, and the environment artist made a really cool, awesome world to then make it look really good. And if they don't make it look really good, something's going to pop up in an argument in a HR meeting. So, character art, collaboration departments. Once again, this is an overview, but this is also for university people right now. You're not just making characters for yourself or for your character team. You are a collaborative role which has so many people dependent on you. Everyone plays like games and they play as a character, which means it's a very important focal point in an environment because you might be looking at it. If you're playing God of War, your obviously eyes meant to be put onto the boss. When you look behind them and you have the axes, you can see all the details on the arms and behind the back of the shoulders. People stare at characters. From that means there's a lot of collaboration that needs to happen to make sure what we do is really great, and if we can help other people out, then that's like you get an extra bonus. Concept artists, I already went through this, but once again, we assist them in telling them the technical limitations of what we can actually do, and trying to find a vision with the art director to actually be practical in terms of a technical sense. Also, we have some creative thoughts that we might want to get the concept artist to do. We might have a good idea. And character artists are allowed to have that creative control to say, hey, we have an idea for like this cool looking guy. And then the second bit, which is something I didn't realize when I was in university, you work with programming and you sort of like give them characters. It could be that 6-armed demigorgon thing. They're like, actually, we want to try that out and see if it works. So we're going to ask you to create a really quick one in one day. And then I get to have 1 day of freedom. I get to make this awesome looking 6-armed god. And then they reject it 2 days later because it obviously doesn't work with technical budgets. But that's a fun little bit that I didn't realize while I was in university. The next bit is marketing art. Front cover of a game has things on it. You might be asked to add the things to that front image. You might be asked by a marketing artist, hey, I really like that character. We've had a conversation. Can we put that on the front of the game? And I mean, you can't say no. You just have to give them yes and then help them out and have a relationship there. where you get to have, sometimes the characters that you worked on the front of the game, or the rocks, or the buildings, or the focal points that you had in those environments on the front of the game.
Yeah, it still plays to environment, so yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so relations are always there. And posters, marketing adverts, I don't know what else might come up, but it's not just the front cover of the game, it covers a wide spectrum of like everything that goes into promoting a game into being bought. And the last thing is, some of you guys, does anyone know what outsource is? Put your hand up in the air really quick. We got one person, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's everyone. Okay, I'll round that up. But outsource is basically simple, elevator pitch, a collection of freelancers who a production studio will hire in to help them make a game. You guys might work for outsource studios if you've only one day. It's really fun. You get to just make art. You don't have to worry about some of the other stuff I say above that because you're brought in just to do a particular job, which means you can make a lot of fun characters really quickly. Your job then as a character artist in the industry working with outsource is providing documentations on how to make things, because if I use this color paint, I need to tell them to use that color paint, so we have the same color paint. Simple analogy, I guess. So once again, I'm not going to go as in depth as my friend Connor did because, there's so much to go into with my characters. So I thought I would do an overview and summarize it up. Here's 2 sculpts I worked on. These are organic little subjects. These are organic stuff. They're organic because they're flashy. Flashy means organic, hard surface means robots and metal. So I haven't done much robots and metal at all, really. So I haven't really got anything to show on that. So if you guys did Overwatch, Diva stuff, I can't help you on that side, but organic stuff is really cool. So when you first get into doing Z, which a lot of people really like doing anatomy sculpts, it's a lot of what people like is like doing a deltoid, a bicep, and making an arm. Then it looks like an arm and you think it's really cool. And then you make another arm, and then you make legs, and you make a torso, and then you make a character. And you think it's all good, and then it looks like SpongeBob SquarePants, and it doesn't look good. And someone tells you that. And then you start the process again, and you do it again and again and again. The left image is a line I made, really cool thing. I wanted to make a line with no skin, so I did the right thing there, which is like all the muscles in a line. I dragged all the little digital clay out, and then I made this line, or crochet is the name of it, an anatomy study. Got that right. And then it looked really cool. So then you get to see what's underneath all the skin of a line, and it was really cool to like study like vet books to work that out. You get like a little bit nerdy, and you get to learn some really cool Latin names, which makes you feel cool when your friends are doing like doctor degrees, but you're doing game art, and you know some things, From that, I did some technical stuff, combined it together, then we got this fleshy looking lion. And then that's a really fun thing to do. It's like, you just get to make really cool stuff. And this is one of the first things I made. I guess when I decided I wanted to do character art, I did about a year after I made the decision and working with Pierre to do stuff. I did it in about 2 weeks. Getting to add the flesh and getting to see like the vascularity of how muscles and fat layers work on stuff. There isn't like an actual science to it. It's more so you judging it by eye, building up this visual reference that Connor talked about earlier. And you get to make cool things. The second thing I did was I made like this really cool, like it isn't fan art, it looks like Bullseye. I looked at Bullseye, I've never seen Bullseye. I just wanted to make a cool superhero who was like jacked on steroids, so that looked really fun to me. So I looked at bodybuilders, Mr. Olympia and all that, and then we made this really cool jacked guy on steroids, and I called it a Bullseye fan art. It's really cool then to like make really cool looking superheroes, because it's like, if you guys have been in comic books or like video games and you've seen like, Thanos, or you've seen, what's the guy from God of War? Kratos,
yeah.
Like you can make your own in Blender. You just have to study, get some reference, and then like pull stuff out, watch tutorials, and then give it 6 months, give it 7 months, give it a year, give it a couple of years. You might get it really quickly, you might not, but then you get to actually just make really cool things and like say, oh shoot, there you go, catch myself. Then you say, I made something. Like you made something really cool and you can be proud of it. The other side of this then is clothing and fabrics. Once again, I'm not going over hard surface or cool stuff or weapons, which some character artists do. This is the Sniper Elite 5 stuff I did. There's only 2 images from it. I worked on about, I think, like 17 out of the 25 characters we worked on, but I won't show every single one of them because there's no point. These guys were made with photogrammetry. Who knows what photogrammetry is here? We got yes. Nearly everyone. For the people that don't know what photogrammetry is, it's basically when you take a camera, a really, sometimes expensive one is what we use, a Rebellion, but sometimes you can use your phone if you want to do it at home. You can actually just download an app right now and do it. It's really cool. You can like scan a chair. But we scan like people and clothing. We have basically, at Rebellion, we have like this 25,000 costume like warehouse, which is really cool. It's really cool to talk about. It means I can just go there, pick up this really cool costume that my art director wants me to sort of take, and I see like this Toys R Us warehouse of this tons and tons and tons of uniforms from different wars and from just different stages of history. And then I basically get a mannequin and I put it on there. Photogrammetry. You take a camera, you take lots of images of it, it stitches together, and it makes the interpretation of a mesh. That 3D mesh I talked about, the polygons, they now come together to make this thing. Before I talked about like high polys and I showed a line, that wasn't done with photogrammetry, that was done by just the digital clay thing I just mentioned. I pulled it out and I did chisel lines, pulled it out, etc., etc., etc. But this is actually done for you by taking photos. Now a lot of people thought, and I thought in university, oh no, my job is ruined. I can't make lines anymore or bodybuilder superheroes because I can just scan them. But in actuality, it's just a tool. So to understand, once again, art foundation, you need to know how folds work, X, Y, Z folds, stuff like this. Marvelous design is the same thing. The knowledge is all fundamentally the same. It's a tool that you use to sort of get it across. So yeah, then the same thing on the right image. I did props and stuff like that for it. A lot of people think that environment art is similar to level art and is also similar to props. But in reality, it's not always as simple as that. Like I'm a character artist and I've made props for my characters, which means in reality, make sure you pay attention to prop artists because they probably have a good few ideas about how to bake stuff and how to make stuff. It's not all linear. Like if you're an environment artist, you listen to environment artists. A lot of this stuff overlaps in this world of the game industry. Cool. Once again, university, I had ideas. Game industry, 3 years later, some of my ideas were wrong. So if we just go through them, character art is not just making a super cool, awesome looking superhero and it looks really cool, but actually sometimes it's collaborating with a team of people who want to make the best superhero, for example. We all have ideas here. I'm sure a lot of you guys have really good ideas. They might be the best ideas in the circle, but you have to talk with a team of people to actually get it across in the game industry. You can't be a prima donna, you can't be a diva and just have your own idea for stuff. So you don't just get to make the awesome Kratos every time. The second bit is, it isn't always finishing off your character. You might finish off a drawing right now and it's done, but in a game industry sense, we have schedules, production timelines, and you might need to go into a different stuff and, oh my gosh, what is happening? I've worked on 4 characters in 4 weeks, and I didn't finish a single one of them, because I had to quickly hop around and help a production cycle. So ownership of your work is really great, being a stakeholder of your work is really great, but at the same time, sometimes you just got to hop out and make like, I don't know, maybe like a little piece of the fingers have to be finished off because some other artist is on holiday and they need it really quickly for a deadline. And that is your role. And then on your portfolio, maybe 3 years later when you guys are finished university, you have that sculpted finger on your portfolio. We care about that stuff, you know, when we're hiring, which is good. It's not just sculpting assets, like I said previously, it's using photogrammetry, marvelous designer. There will be a new thing probably in 2 years' time, which is AI, 4D, photogeometry, marvelous designer, combined Demigorgon Thanos thing that does all of my job in one go. You still need somebody to use that tool and combine it together. You have to be the building pressure. And at the same time, art fundamentals are still the exact same. You still need somebody who knows what they're doing because a lot of people push buttons but they don't know about like art, and character artists and environment artists. That's part of the name. Then a day in life character artist isn't just making stuff, it's also paperwork. There you go, long story short, paperwork. It is having meetings all day. Sometimes your voice goes. And you just have meetings, about doing work, and then instead of doing the work, you talk more meetings about the work that's meant to be done in the future. That's a part of the life of it. As well as that, it's making documentation. How did you make it? You did something really good, that's really sick. We want to know how as a company because we want to then share it out to more people so they can learn from you. And likewise, if Terry, the lead character artist, made something really cool, and you're a junior or you're an intern, you want to know how you made it. So they'll send it to you, they'll show you how they made it. Documentation matters. And then the final thing is character art is not saying your work is done when it's done. When you finish drawing right now, that's great, you got it done. But as you guys know, you get your work marked in school or college or university. You have lecturers and teachers to give you feedback. That doesn't change wherever you go. Unless it's personal work. That's great. If it's personal work, you can say when it's done yourself. But in the industry, it goes through your senior character artist, then your lead character artist, then the art director. And if any one of them say no at some point, you have to go back to a certain part of the process and fix it up. And then it could be you go to senior, back to the character, then lead, back to the character, then art director, back to character. And before you know, you're dragging your hair out because you've been on character for 6 months. That can happen. Cool, and I guess that concludes the character art stuff, so we'll just talk about a little bit more general game art stuff now.
Yeah. So yeah, like we mentioned in the start of the presentation, you've obviously got the indie studios and the AAA, so we'll talk a little bit about how they differ. So, next slide. So, pretty much like the main way that they differ is indie studios are obviously a lot smaller, which means that the main thing is that you'll have more responsibilities. So like I was mentioning earlier with the environment stuff, you can go into sub-discipline or like specialist roles, but this is obviously usually within AAA studios. But indie studios, you're expected to know pretty much all of it, or at least a little bit of all of it. So yeah, that's the main thing with indie studios, but also like depending on how big the staff is for an indie studio, you usually have like creative control over a range of disciplines. You can really make the game that you wanna make, which is another important thing. It's less constrained, more responsibility, like we said. And then, depending on the studio, you also have options for holding a stake within that company. You have a very close social team, so obviously because it's a smaller studio and smaller staff, you usually socialize with everybody rather than just your certain team. And yeah, you get quicker turnarounds on projects. And then with AAA, you usually working with your own department sort of thing. You become very specialized, and it can branch off into different things. And you have less responsibility. But you do have more job security. That's I think that's like one of the other major things with indie studios is that whilst it's got a lot more responsibility and a lot more creative freedom, sometimes job security won't be that great, just because you're relying on like your project to actually make it, sort of thing. Whereas a AAA company, they've got access to a huge amount of funds. So, is there anything else you want to?
Yeah, there's no right answer to this.
Yeah.
Like between transducer and indie studios and small studios and looking at each other in the rows right now and wanting to start a company with each other, there's no actual right answer between doing that or going to a AAA studio. It's up to you guys. Yeah. A lot of times when I was in university, I actually thought like, oh, I need to be into the industry. I need to work for a AAA studio that's established, and voila, that is like the journey. But a lot of people that I know have actually now left Rebellion even just to pursue their own dreams and ideas. You know what I mean? And I think if I was talking to myself, I'd still tell myself to go to a AAA studio to understand how a gigantic, awesome system works to create a game, so you have that experience. Yeah. But then the awesome thing is you can then take that experience and actually make the game you want to make. Like if you have a cool idea, like you can make the game, sell the game, and take all the profit from the game. And I'm not going to say it's like a get-rich-quick thing. It's not crypto. What I'm saying is you can then build something if you want to build something and be a stake owner in something. Yep. And yeah, job security in AAA is also a thing, but also AAA studios do roll over, so it's better but not perfect. So just think about that.
Yep. And yeah, everything is always evolving. So this is like in terms of like the way studios work as well as technology as well. So we're finding nowadays there's a lot more out studios, like Chris was mentioning earlier. So if you just want to be working on the art, outsource are becoming more popular, so you could target that. Work from home is another big thing. So obviously pre-COVID, nobody knew what was going to happen, but now we have full flexibility to work in the comforts of your pajamas, which is always great. So yeah, we've got that. So you're not sort of limited to targeting companies that are solely within the UK. You could be targeting a company that's, I don't know, based in Germany or France or something. So, and still work from the comforts of your home here in the UK. So yeah, work from home is another big one. Blender's come a long way. We used to joke about how crap it was back in the day, and it was trash. But no, Blender's come a long way. Like we said, like it's got a lot of sculpting stuff in it now, and a lot of, because it's open source, generally you get a lot of creative people making like really cool tools in Blender. So Blender's definitely come a long way. So I would encourage you to either target yourself towards the modeling packages that you have in specific studios, so obviously Ubisoft for ES Max, or just learn Blender. Like it's free at the end of the day, so you don't have to pay like £1,000 just to be able to model for like a day. So yeah, use Blender. It's great. And then new software coming out every year. So this leads into photogrammetry as well. So obviously we've got Megascans now, which you'll be using. You could be using quite a lot in the industry. Although I wouldn't limit yourself to photogrammetry. It's still really important to know how to create an asset from scratch, because although photogrammetry is great for getting quick results, you'll still be making assets. It's not, we haven't completely abolished asset making from scratch by this point. So yeah, but yeah, no, it's becoming a lot more common. And yeah, experiment with it. You might look like a bit of a weirdo going and scanning a bunch of stuff like rocks and trees with your phone, but it's great fun. So yeah, experiment with it. It's well worth it. And then yeah, we've got a bigger growth and difference between studios with in-house tech. I don't know if you want to explain about
so
it.
I think one thing to mention is, you know, Fortnite happened, then COVID happened, then Epic Games became an empire. All of their money from Fortnite and skins went into basically back into Unreal Engine. They created an insane engine in UE5, really crazy. And the way ever since something cool happened, probably a decade ago, called PBR, which is a way of authoring textures, which makes stuff shiny. If you guys know what that is, and cool stuff like that. Instead of hand painting stuff, it makes stuff have a level of realism to it now. But a lot of studios had similar in-house tech when PBR occurred. Everyone jumped on it and understood it. But now with in the 2020s, which is what we're in now, which is weird to say now, it makes it sound really current and old. But now there's actually a big jump between studios. A lot of studios made a lot of revenue in the 2010s, and they really had a lot of tech. And some games is some of the most incredible tech I've ever seen. Well, some studios sort of fell behind. The games didn't sell as much in the 2010s, and they didn't have as much money to reinvest, get the best programmers across the world. So there is a big jump across, and so you won't see until you join a company or anything like that. Yeah. There is a jump.
This links back to, I was just going to say, this does link back to the indie studio and AAA as well. So an indie company, you might not necessarily have a huge jump in tech, whereas AAA you obviously will, because obviously they've got loads of money to spend on it. So yeah, that links back to that. So it's something to consider.
And then I think the final thing is, we joined the university now 6 years ago. It's crazy, I feel old. I'm only 24. But what happened is, it actually changed a lot. I did Marvel's designer for 3 years, I sculpted fabric for 3 years, and then I joined my first gig and I was like, I'm the Marvel's designer king. When I walk in here, photogrammetry happened. So a new tool emerged, and then a lot of that I knew fundamentally still mattered and is a great assistant to me. But then it changed literally as I left university. That photogrammetry became a lot more popular in studios, and I used it a lot more often than I ever did Marvel's designer. And I reckon by the time you guys enter university and leave university, there'll be some cool 4D fan art, or some click your finger, and we've got a character or we've got an environment thing. Maybe, probably not, but it could happen. And that's the point, is that everything is always changing and evolving. Yeah. When we were doing 3D art, Blender and that Blender community was not that strong at all. But now you go on TikTok and there's an Arcane Jinx Blender 10-minute fan art, which is done in 5 seconds, and you're scratching your head thinking, oh, damn, I don't need to maybe go to university. Yeah. But that's not the case, because once again, foundational fundamentals matter, because as much as everything changes, the core of the system that has grown artists in the games industry hasn't changed. Yeah. So it's just something to think about.
If you have a good foundation, it's going to be quicker to pick up these new techs. Another good example is AI art. So I don't know if you guys have seen anything like Midjourney or anything like that. That's really cool.
Incredible.
everybody's, I think, gobsmacked by it by this point, but it's still only used as a tool. It's great, but no matter how many times you put through a prompt, say if you create a concept and then gameplay comes back to you and they're like, that doesn't work, we need that changed. No matter how many times you put in through that prompt, it's not going to give you what you want, because it doesn't know. It's just doing things that are random until it gets to the thing that you want to do. So yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. Tech is always evolving, but the core fundamentals still matter, and hopefully our jobs won't be taken soon.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
One thing to say is though, AI art, and there's a lot of scariness around AI art. Oh my gosh, it's going to replace people. We're about, like I said, we use AI art as a tool.
Yeah.
We haven't replaced anyone's jobs. People haven't stopped drawing because AI art now exists. What happens is we use it as a tool to speed up the really boring stuff that we don't want to do anyway. Yeah. I don't want to do a mock-up of this castle for 5 days when I can just get AI art to give me a start and then use it. And then once again, foundation and art comes in. We still need concept artists to then paint over it to iterate on what Connor just mentioned, to get that vision of the art director into the limelight. And then while they're doing that and they're pressing the buttons, they're actually drawing what needs to be done and what the fun stuff is anyway. So it's a tool that's beneficial for you if you want to think about it like that.
Yep. Cool. Is that it?
There you go.
Oh, there we go.
Speaking of art foundation, it matters. I don't know how much I've gone over time, so we're going to try and skip this bit to go to QA, but we're going to basically sum this up really quickly. If you want to be a concept artist and you want to draw, I think traditional art and foundation probably matters. I think we all agree on that, right? If you want to be an art director though, and you want to go that way through the environment artist role, I think Connor will agree with me, you probably want to be able to paint.
Yeah, definitely. Especially for materials as well. So if you want to get into like stylized stuff, painting obviously matters. Although you will be sculpting your materials, but obviously the fundamentals on proportions is really big, especially for game art, environment art. Sorry. Yeah, proportions matter. Moral of the story is you should be using Gina all the time. Pester Gina all the time. Use them all the time. It really does help.
In uni, it actually didn't make sense when we went into game stream. We were a little bit dumb. Perspective matters. There's a guy called Scott Robertson who has a book on perspective. Give it a look. It really matters. Color theory, if you're doing stylized work, is so important. It is so important. And another thing that helps me understand why traditional art matters is this thinking process that, we could play a game on here right now, right? I could play a video of God of War, right? It's not actually a 3D space rendered in 3D. It's a flat screen. It's a frame. It's a 2D image. That's what happens when you render a game. It's a 2D image. It's almost as if it's a painting. That's actually what it is. So you've got to treat it like the 2D image that it represents on the flat screen. And that's how a lot of art directors actually think about this stuff. It's the reason why Connor's contrast and line stuff matters so much, because it has to recreate aspects of a painting that looks good through each frame of movement in 3D. I guess the final thing is, from character art side, once again, skipping through this bit, it matters to know how to draw anatomy and stuff like that, because it helps reorient proportions and shape language, which means things look good and don't look like potatoes. If you want to be a potato artist, that's also fine, but if you don't want to be, you want to make sure you're self-aware of that.